ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On ACC Podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. We have a special episode. Normally, I have all my guys rolling through Locked On Podcast Network, but I figured it's championship week, so why not have some special players added to the mix? Cam Lemons is joining the show. He covers Wake Forest in many capacities. I'm going to let him give his affiliates because I never like to get him wrong, right? So we're going to give all the affiliates, how he started with covering the Demon Deacons and all of that good stuff. We're going to talk about how Wake Forest got here to the ACC championship game, winning the Atlantic Division, and then more importantly, what can they do to ultimately get the ship? So Cam, all of that to say, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thanks for joining, and tell people where you cover the Demon Deacons and how long you've been doing it so that they know you've been in the trenches.
So I'm a class of 2018 grad from Wake Forest. I started at Blogger So Dear over on the SB Nation site in 2016 as a junior. And then in the winter/spring of 2020, picked up also working at Demon Deacon Digest over at 247 Sports.
Nice. So you started in 2014? I graduated from grad school at Wake 2014. I did their MA program in the business school. Yeah.
Nice.
So we probably never saw each other because I was steady in the business school. I didn't have a life.
As a scary little freshman, I did not traverse over there at all.
It was but so big that I was in the calf most times eating Chick-fil-A, and that's about all there was. No doubt. So let's get into these Demon Deacons, right? 2020 season, 4-5, 3-4 in the ACC. Wasn't what anyone, 2020, everybody was just surviving. But then 2021 hits. They're sitting 5th in the conference preseason predictions, and everyone's like, it's Wake Forest. Typically get the same kind of stuff. Did you have any expectations for this team going into this year?
I'd be lying if I didn't say no.
Okay.
So I actually did a season preview right before the first game against ODU, and I actually had Wake Forest going 10-2 with losses to Clemson and UNC.
Wow.
So I had it. I feel like a good idea of it, but as a whole, I think this was for the fan base. If there was gonna be a year, this was gonna be the year.
Mm-hmm.
You had a favorable opening stretch with ODU, Norfolk State. And while FSU's looked better as the season went on, they weren't as great. You had toss-ups with UVA, Louisville, Syracuse, Army, etc. But there was a real sense that, if you could get past that first sense of the 8-9 games, like Duke was number 9, this could be the year. And, while there were some bumps along the way and some injuries, especially like Donovan Green and Javionte Nash, we found out at the AC kickoff, it was a sense that you could get past that first stretch. You did, and here we are 12 weeks later.
Absolutely. Now, some people were saying the books were cooked a little bit. Like they had a nice, good stretch in the beginning and they hadn't really played anybody. But, I just saw a Wake Forest team that looked confident. A lot of these teams that we looked across the conference didn't look as confident as Wake did. And one of the things I've always said, you can't mess up with Wake. They're going to play good ball every single time. Clausen is a great coach, right? But, when you were looking as they kept progressing and being undefeated, did you have any nerves going into UNC? Did you just know like it's always going to be a mismatch or it's going to be super stressful?
Yeah, UNC was always the game that just is going to be super stressful, regardless of what the record is for them. Still have a good offense. They can still cause some havoc on defense. It's a road game, so that always gives a little bit of extra oomph. And so it's always one of those things. It was a little more painful that it was the exact same sort of game from last year. And the exact same sort of game from last year. But it was about as expected. So
Yeah, that November 13th game, though, with NC State, it came down to, some really good plays. I think NC State couldn't get off the field on defense, but a lot of conversation went around A.T. Perry. Let's talk about these wide receivers here. That offensive pass interference has been one of the, I see him in the highlights. I'm like, I need ACC Network to stop showing the highlights where he's clearly extending his arm. But for you as a Wake guy, how do you feel about offensive pass interference in general? Do you think they should call it, not call it? But more importantly, about these wide receivers that Sam Hartman has got to throw to this year. They've just been incredible.
First with the offensive pass interference, at a certain point, they're just not going to call it, so keep doing it. I don't care at that point. What I want is them to stop calling as much DPI. Like if you're not going to call it on the offense, let the guys play on the other end.
That's fair.
That's fine, but also sometimes just be bigger.
Yeah.
Carry 6'5", 6'5", 200 pounds. Sorry.
No,
But
facts.
as a whole, like, as mentioned with Donovan Green going down at the beginning of the year, there was a bit of a worry. I mean, we came into the year thinking, Ja'Cory Roberson was going to be who he was. He was an all ACC receiver last year, one of the tops in the NCAA as a whole. But then there was Taylor Morin as a super sure-handed receiver. But then there was kind of a what's left. And then they had a transfer, Casey Washington, who ended up actually having to transfer out. And there was all these kind of things of, what's going to go on here? And then here comes some 6'5" dude they've flipped from UAB a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And, we kind of heard some things going around in camp being like, he's really flashing. And it's like, okay, is that the corners being bad or is that him being good? And here we have it that it's the latter. And so, but then you've also gotten some good play out of a freshman like Keyshawn Williams, who's really started to show, like, when Corey Robeson's gone probably after this year, they'll be just fine, the slot receiver. Donald Stewart, a transfer from Stanford, hasn't been the flashiest guy, but has always been like a guy that's just it's 3rd and 2. Okay, cool. He gets 10-yard catch.
Right. Yeah.
It really just speaks to the testament that Sam Hartman and these guys put in a lot of work this summer. There's a lot of confidence from those guys saying, hey, this is going to be the year we put some numbers up, and they've kind of backed that up.
Yeah. And listen, before we get to Sam Hartman, we're going to talk about him quite a bit, but the 5 returning starters at O-line, have you been impressed by them? Because I think a lot of people always go to, your flashy guys, the ones who can get stuff done, make it look pretty, but the game is won in the trenches. I will always say, you got to give up for the big men. If you don't feed them right, if you don't get them to be on one accord, it's going to be a long day for your school. How have you felt about these guys?
Yeah, I mean, football is about blocking and tackling. At the end of the day, it's about blocking and tackling. And when at the AC kickoff in July, when Dave Clawson told us that the 5th returning starter, Jevionte Nash, was going to be out for the season, a little bit of worry. I mean, you never want to mess up the continuity of things, and especially we knew a guy like Terrence Davis wasn't really going to play because he's injured as well. So it's like, what's going to go on there? And you insert at right tackle Devontae Gordon, who's in his, I believe, 2nd year. Has really just kind of turned the tide and been a guy at that right tackle has been amazing for a guy playing his first year. And you've seen kind of the cohesion. You've seen it when it's not worked. They could say against Clemson. Clemson is who they are. But when they're missing their starting center, Michael Juergens, things can't go that well. They're not passing off blocks too well, et cetera, et cetera. But when they've been all across the board, it's been a pretty – Nick Tabaka, our offensive line coach, does a very good job. And he finds the guys. He have a first-team left tackle in Zach Tom. Sean McGinn and Mullock and Juergens all made all ACC team as well. They're just continually just churning out guys.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, of course, the man of the hour, Sam Hartman, he's had one hell of a year. He's waited his turn, though. I think that's the biggest thing that has been most impressive. A lot of guys we see just look at the transfer portal. I'm like, let me just enter, I don't get one rep and I'm already ready to go. So I think it's been impressive to see him stick it out. And of course, the battle of Hartman and Howell, which, being a Carolina girl, I've got to enjoy from both sides of the coin. But for you, Sam Hartman has really kind of taken the next step in his play. There's been some struggles, right? He's shown that he has, a couple of flaws, but overall, what would you say about him and how he's going to lead this team going into Saturday?
I've been the biggest Sam Hartman critic, I think, coming out of the Jamie Newman year in 2019 and going into 2020. And even after last year, there were definite things that he had limitations. Like there was never a point that you went, who's the best team you've beaten? And it was always, is it a random Tulane team? Is it Towson? Like, there was just never a signature win on his resume. And he's gone above and beyond that this year. And there's been kind of 2 parts of that with him. It's been one part of just mental wise, like he'll still throw a couple interceptions. Like, he's had a little bit of struggles with that the last few games, and they're trying to clean that up. But he's not letting that get to him. Like, there would be times last year and 2 years ago where he'd throw an interception and it would kind of just all come crashing down. And you don't see that as much this year. He'll throw an interception, it'll look bad. And like, you know what? Cool. Next drive, throw a touchdown. That's kind of what we've seen out of him. Second thing has been his legs. There's a lot of talk about, Sam Howell, and of course, Malik Cunningham does things with his legs. Sam Howell has 10 plus touchdowns on the ground. Like, he's been a guy that just has not been afraid to take off and even just use it just to extend the play. And that's been probably the most welcome thing. I mean, people were really kind of teeing off a bit and saying, he's not as mobile as a Jamie Newman or even as John Wofford in the past. And he's taken that and evolved his game, saying, hey, now they have to actually respect that, which has opened up the running game, which has opened up a little more time for guys like AT, guys like Keyshawn, guys like Jacory Roberson to get open, and it's really taking the offense to another level.
Yeah, listen, I'm gonna pour one out for Jamie Newman because I know my dog. He been through it. Like,
Man, I miss that kid.
he literally was just. He's a brick. First of all, but second of all, like just how his whole stuff has transpired. I'm like,
Right.
dog. Like, I know he's missing Wake Forest right now.
Yeah.
But of course, you talk about the great parts of offense, and then there's that defense that clearly like loves to be on the field, but maybe not because the offense goes so quickly that they're like, oh, can I get a breath? Can I get a second? That's going to be one of the Achilles heels going into Saturday. But for you, how can this defense hold Kenny Pickett to minimal offense and really trying to keep themselves in a position to be a complete team?
First things first, tackle.
Yeah.
Football's about blocking and tackling. Dave Clawson said it pretty adequately yesterday during his press conference. I think out of this year, you've seen 2 or 3 of Wake's best defensive games they've ever had in Dave Clawson's tenure, and you've seen 2 or 3 of the absolute worst.
Right.
And a lot of that is some of that's been some injuries. Wake's had a lot of injuries on the back end, especially with like Mr. Greer's questionable, Chetland Garnes. They left the entire UNC game without 2 of their starting 3 cornerbacks. It's just been a lot going on there. But at the end of the day, it's just you guys need to tackle. Like you need to tackle, and we saw some chinks in that armor against BC, but they really cleaned it up and ended up holding BC to 6 yards in the second half. So that's one thing. And second thing is just making sure they can bring pressure. This team blitzes at about an FBS pace, so about 30% of the time on passing downs. But it's really when they start getting those first stops, second stops, third stops, you start seeing Lyle Hempel, the defensive coordinator, go, okay, I'm fine bringing these guys for the fifth, sixth, seventh guy and just making life hectic. And that's what you're gonna need to do against this Pitt offense. They're electric. They have 3-4 guys that can beat you on the outside. Kenny Pickett was just named the ACC Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year.
Right.
I don't think anyone's saying, hey, Wake, go out there and pitch a shutout and hold them to 14 points. But if you can get off the field on third down, if you can just hold them to a couple field goals and say, you know what, they average 43 points a game, have them to 35, 38, 40, give yourself a fighting chance and keep creating the turnovers like we've seen the last few games and give your offense a chance to say, hey, let's just stop them right now.
Absolutely. I live for a good open field tackle. Let me just say that's my favorite part of the game. But I think it's just like having the confidence. That's something that Wake, don't be the side of the ball that everyone's like, well, you know how their defense is. So I think that's the mental part of it is where they're going to have to really hang tough. But again, like we said, evenly matched teams, both finished 7-1 in conference play. Both teams are overall 10-2. If you could give a prediction of where you think how this game is going to go, what would you say? You don't even have to give me a score, but just how do you feel like this game is going to go?
I have laughed at the over of 72.5. Like I think this is going to be a 48-45 sort of game. I understand Pitt's defense has been good, but again, I just kind of go, this is an offense that really hasn't been stopped except by Clemson. I think there's going to be some turnovers going to happen, and I think it's going to come down to who makes the plays off of turnovers. And I think that's something Wake struggled the last few weeks is I think in the last 11, 12 turnovers in the last 4 games, they've scored a touchdown twice on those. And I think, if Wake does that again against an offense like this, they're going to lose. And if they don't do that, and if they score off those turnovers, then I think that's where the tide turns. So I don't know who wins just yet, but I think this is going to be a 40-40 sort of game.
Ooh, okay. I like the high numbers, but I also think when we talk about people showing out for Wake Forest in Pittsburgh, they're saying, oh, there's not going to be a lot of fans and all that hoopla. To me, why should people pay attention to the Wake Forest team?
I mean, this has been one of the most fun teams I've watched, and I watch way too much college football, like way more than I should. But this has honestly been a fun team. This is your electric, hey, I'm going to watch here. I'm not going to watch, sorry, Wisconsin, sorry, Penn State. This is going to be a grueling 17-play drive going up the field. Like, no, this is going to be 3-4 plays, 75 yards. All right, let's keep it going. And I think that's what people want to see. I think, and I'm really excited. I know there's 25,000 Wake fans right now scheduled to go down. And I think that's a really good thing. I mean, it's also one of the better stories of the year. I mean, you also have Cincinnati hopefully getting to the playoff. You have a team like BYU looking good in Utah. But I mean, for the smallest P5 school in the country to be doing this, and I get ACC's down, et cetera, people like points, and this team puts up points. And so,
no doubt. Listen, the ACC ain't that down. Let's keep it a band, first of all. But also, I'm happy for Wake Forest. I think it really speaks to, like, also, we're talking about ACC schools, what Duke kind of needs to get on board with. I'm like, you're a small private school. You got to figure things out because clearly, so they're on pace. So when you see one doing it exponentially well and the other doing bad, like things got to happen. So I'm not going to say Wake Forest is the reason why Coach Cutcliffe got his job taken away, but I'm not going to say it's not a factor. No doubt. Well, Cam, it's always a pleasure to get to talk to somebody who, of course, knows the game very well. Can you please remind folks of where they can find you, follow your work?
Yep. So you can follow my work at Blogger So Dear on SB Nation, at Demon Deacon Digest on 247 Sports. If you want to follow my terrible tweets, it is at @KenLemons_. You see Dakotas Debro, that is me. Shout out to Dakotas Crawford, one of the best names I've ever seen in recruiting. But
love that. And at the end of the day, I like your tweets because I think you're very honest. And everyone's not honest, especially when it comes to their school. We can't have those honest conversations with people going back and forth and people be hating and you're just like, listen, let it fly, whatever. So I really appreciate that. Make sure you guys follow him. Again, listen to @LockedOnACC. You can follow us on Twitter, follow the podcast wherever you listen. And until next time.